Okay, in this video I want to talk about some play aids that I use when I'm playing a Panzer Korps scenario. These are my own invention, they're not in any way official and they may or may not be to your taste, but I thought I'd share what I do because I found it useful, and there may be some ideas which will also help you with your battles. The first thing we're looking at here is a sheet of what I call unit cards. And this is a sheet, in this case an A4 sheet of paper, that I will make up before playing a scenario. And the examples I'm using here are from the Tel Aissa scenario, which is available on the Panzer Korps site. It's a sub-part of the El Alamein battle that happened after the main action was over. Each of the rectangles here is a formation, a battalion or similar. What I do is I cut the sheet of paper up and place one of these cards behind each of the formations on the battlefield. I'll zoom in a moment on some of the units in more detail so you can see exactly what's there, but just to talk about a couple of the things that you can see even at this level of zoom. Obviously the roundels, the national symbols, indicate the side or the nationality of the formation. The coloured dots, less obvious, they represent the brigade or force group that each of these battalions belongs to. So the ones in the centre column are all part of one force group, and in this case the 9th Australian, and the ones in the right hand column, South African, part of the South African division. The two units at the top are the HQs of the respective force groups. The left-hand column is units that aren't part of any force group. A supply column is an example there, but also in this particular scenario there are quite a number of aircraft squadrons, 6 in this case on the UK side, and they again are not part of any particular force group. Now we can look at the Axis equivalents. A couple of other things to point out here. Obviously Italian and German symbols, and I've also used colours to distinguish. There's both Italian and German forces in this battle. As you can see from the coloured dots, there's just one force group for the Italians and just one for the Germans, again with their own respective HQs, and again some aircraft on the left hand side which are not part of any force group. Just as an aside, there is no supply column in this scenario for the Axis, which can be quite tricky for the Italians if they run out of ammo. Okay, so let's zoom in on the British, some of the British units first, just to see what I put on these cards. And as I say, these travel around the battlefield with the units, and they're really for two purposes. One of them is as a reminder of various pieces of information that you need, particularly in combat, for these formations, just to save you going away and looking up lots of tables all the time. The other thing that I use these for is for marking off things which need to be expended, as it were. Just to cover those first, in the centre of each unit's list you'll see something marked as panic. And in all of these cases, in fact, there are 3 circles next to that. That represents the number of times this formation is allowed to panic and recover before it is irrevocably left the table. So in all of these cases they can suffer panic, drop back to recover, and I will cross off one of those circles when that happens, and then they will move back into the line, and they can suffer those ill effects and drop back 3 times and still come back to fight. The 4th time, in this case, they will have to leave the field until the next day, and I use those circles to track those panic events, so that I know when they've had their lot. The other item that I cross off, the icons in the top right hand corner of each box, represent the decorated leaders that have been assigned to these particular battalions. So in this case you can see I've given the top 2 one each, and the third one down 2 decorated leaders. The final one, which is artillery, doesn't have any. That's not surprising, that's quite normal, because decorated leaders with battalions are there really to stiffen their morale in combat or after combat, and it is quite unusual for artillery to be suffering direct combat effects. If they do, you've probably done something wrong. So again, if a decorated leader is killed in combat, which can happen if you have a cover die roll of 1, then I will cross off one of those icons so that I can see again at a glance that they no longer get the benefit of that leader's presence to recover an extra point of disorder each turn. The other information on these cards, as I say, which is there for handy reference, the battalion's name or the unit's name, its type, infantry or in this case Bren carriers, in the second one Valentine tanks, and then an artillery regiment at the bottom. The morale with the dice that you roll for morale tests, in all of these cases happens to be a D10, but if they were elite, for example, I would say D12. That's the sort of thing that you fairly quickly, once you've been playing these rules a while, remember anyway, but it's useful as a reminder. The next line shows the fire die. Again, something that's useful, and again, slightly less easy to remember, particularly when you're talking about tanks and so on, where it is based on the caliber of the guns. There are two dice sizes shown for each of those, one for the normal firing, and the second smaller dice is for if the unit is suppressed. Down at the bottom I'll put handy information. For example, for the armoured units I will show the range of the main gun and also the type of armour. So if it's a lightly armoured vehicle, I will show it the cover die will be a D6, medium armour D8, and so on. For the artillery I note the blast circle. So they're the sorts of things that you need when you're adjudicating combats and that you would otherwise have to go away and look up on a table somewhere, and I found it useful to have that all gathered together. Looking at the Axis one, again, as I say, this is the well, in one case, the top one is the headquarters unit for the German force group, but then 3 squadrons of planes. Similar information: the name, the type of plane, the morale level, fire die and panic information. The last line, I've gathered their information from the equipment tables. I would also have done that on the other cards if there had been any relevant information. This is where you get bonuses, or indeed negative bonuses, because of the performance of the particular piece of equipment. So in the case of the 109 squadron, as you can see, they get a bonus to their fire die, +2, and the opponent gets a -1 on his fire die, because of the performance of the plane both in attack and in defence. It's presumably more nimble than average. Down at the bottom you'll see the Stuka is just the opposite. If it is firing at opposition planes, it will have a negative on its fire die, and its opponent, if opponent is attacking it, they will get a bonus to their fire die because the plane is sort of lumbering and fairly defenceless. Again, that sort of information you would need to go away and look in the equipment tables every time if you didn't have it easily gathered there on the cards. So as I say, stuff that's useful all the time, and I bring them together. It's a little bit of work in advance, but as I've said quite a few times, Panzer Korps is not really the rule set that you just bang together a few units in 5 minutes and have a go. Normally you're recreating fairly large battles, usually with planned scenarios, and I find a little bit of work in advance, not a huge amount, but putting these cards together really helps me in fighting the battle. Okay, let's have a look at how I use these in practice, and also some of the other play aids that I use when I'm fighting a battle. This is a formation from the Tel Aissa scenario. It's a Bersaglieri battalion with the 3 infantry companies at the front there, and as you can see they've got a couple of attachments. There's a HMG company and some medium tanks. Now, as I said earlier, when I'm fighting the scenario, I move the little unit cards around behind the units as I've got them here, or squeeze them in wherever I can if there's a complicated setup. A number of people don't like tokens and things like this on the battlefield because they don't look as if they belong there. that's fine, that's a view. I personally take the view that the units we've got here are representations. They, although I spend a lot of time and effort modelling these units and I love the look of them, I don't have any illusions that this is actually what the units would really look like. Each of these bases is a company, so we're talking about 100 plus men, spread out over probably several hundred yards of terrain, dug in, hiding, probably in the desert, not hiding terribly well, but certainly in the European theatre, if you were looking down at the battlefield from above at this unit, you might well not see anybody at all. Certainly they would be doing their best to be keeping out of sight. So these units are really tokens, they're representations. So to me, the battlefield is something between a genuine diorama of what the battle would have looked like and a map, or perhaps a computer game where tokens move around. And I've got no problems at all, in fact I think it looks quite good personally, to have the information travelling around with them. Anyway, as I say, it's personal taste, and this is what works for me. And the other thing that's very important for me is that it works as in terms of fighting the battle. It makes it much easier to find the information you need quickly, and really kind of greases the wheels of the mechanics of the game. So to talk about a few of the other play aids I use, the most important piece of information throughout the game, the key to the combat system, is disorder. And as I've mentioned in some other videos, I use tiny little dice to indicate the number of disorder points that a unit has accumulated. So as they take incoming fire, they might get 1 or 2 points. They'll rally them off, get rid of them in the movement phase of the turn. Then they take more incoming fire. When they get up to 3, then they have reached a state of suppression. Now, the fact that there's 3 points there is actually enough to tell you, and in strictly speaking you wouldn't need any other tokens, but I find it useful to use a token specifically to indicate that the battalion is suppressed. And I use this little pink cube. I got a whole bunch of things, different colours like this from Hobbycraft, and I use them in various different sets of wargames rules to mean different things. And in Panzer Korps, the pink cube means that the unit is suppressed. And the reason why I do this, as well as having the suppression dice, is that it's easy to see at a glance looking across the field which formations have been suppressed. As the disorder increases and you reach 6, then the formation has become fragmented. Now, in the rules, I think they recommend you use 1 yellow token for suppressed and 2 yellow tokens for fragmented. Again, I don't quite follow that, and in this case I actually use a different token. So when the unit becomes fragmented, I replace the pink token with a red one. It's easy for me to remember. Pink is sort of mild, red is strong, so the negative effects are stronger. And again, it's easy to see at a glance looking across the table that this unit is fragmented. As disorder accumulates more, then I will add more dice. So if this unit happened to take another 3 disorder points, it now has 9. When it takes a morale test and panics, if it fails the morale test, then I indicate that with a white cube. So I don't know whether it's white feather they're running away, but it's just the colour I've chosen to use. And of course, as I said earlier, when it's panicked, then I will take this card and I will mark off one of the circles to indicate that it's had one of its 3 lives, as it were. When it returns to the fight, when it falls back, the panic marker is removed, and it'll start to recover that disorder, so it'll eventually be able to return to the battle. And as it goes forward, it'll take more damage, perhaps fail its morale test again, and I'll cross off more of those circles until eventually, as I said earlier, it has taken its 3, it fails once more, then it's gone. It simply has to retreat back off the battlefield without stopping, and that's the end of it, certainly for the day. If I take a 1 on the cover die, then 2 things happen. Firstly, I will remove one of these attached companies, And you'll note that there's nothing on the unit card to indicate anything about the attached companies. That's because the companies are their own tokens. The fact that that tank unit was attached immediately tells me that the formation gets the +1 or +2, and the fact that it's been removed tells me that it's gone. But the other combat effect of a 1 on the cover die is that you may lose your decorated leader, and in this case there is one. That'll be crossed off, and now there isn't one. And so again, I know that I don't anymore take off the extra 1 disorder point at the end of each turn or beginning of each movements phase, because the decorated leader is no longer there. A few other tokens that I use to indicate various states. If the unit is hidden, and that's quite often the case, particularly at the start of scenarios, many scenarios will say that one side's units, or some of them, begin hidden, then I indicate that with the green token. The other thing I use the green tokens for is if infantry dig in. If infantry are in the open but they remain stationary, then they will dig in and give themselves a minimum of light cover. Normally you can tell the cover that a unit has got because it's in a piece of terrain. So if it's in a wood, then it has the appropriate cover level, or if it's in a village or a town. But if an infantry unit is sitting in the open, then you need a reminder to tell you that they've had a stationary turn and they've dug in, and I use a green token for that as well. The other thing that infantry may be is entrenched. This is heavier earthworks or heavier defensive works, normally only available if they've been created in advance of the battle. And if that's the case for a particular unit, then I will give them a brown token to indicate the entrenched status, which again gives them an improvement in fact it reduces the enemy fire die. The final thing I use tokens for, the final colour, is I use a blue cube for low ammo. So the first time a unit rolls a low ammo score, I will give it 1 cube. If it rolls a second one, or indeed if it rolls a 6 and goes straight to an out of ammo status, then it gets 2 cubes, and that indicates it's no ammo. It can't fire until it's resupplied by coming close to a supply column. So those are the tokens that I have found useful in putting next to units to immediately indicate their status. You could, if you dislike having clutter on your battlefield, do all of this by bookkeeping, by having a list of the units on a piece of paper next to the battlefield, and keeping track that way. That's fine if that works for you. For me, I have these tokens here. They're next to the units. I can instantly see that this one here is entrenched, but it's out of ammo, so it won't be able to fire back, and so on. And having those tokens means that I don't have to keep referring away to bits of paper or to tables somewhere. So, as I say, that's how I've worked out the best way for me of displaying information on the Panzer Korps battlefield, to make it easier to play the game and less likely that you might forget something important during the battle.